Hello, fellow travelers, and welcome to the Versus Stars podcast. How my loyal listeners, thank you for continued support. And remember, click the subscribe button, everybody. This is an amazing episode because Alex Paknadel boards the mothership. You know him as the writer of Red Goblin from Marvel and Night Terror's Flash from DC Comics. Come aboard as we go traversing the stars. Hello, Mr. Paknadel. Thank you so much for coming to Versus Stars podcast.
Appreciate you having me. Thanks ever so much, Jeff.
Totally my pleasure. So I always start with a question of inspiration. So what inspired your love for comics and who your earliest influences?
Oh, okay. I don't mean for this to be long-winded, but I'm kind of second generation. So my dad sort of taught me to read with Marvel Treasury editions. So yeah, they've kind of always been there, really. But I would say, I kind of gently fell out of love with them, I think, in sort of the late 90s, because I sort of went to college and discovered booze. But I think what kind of dragged me back in was probably, I think, like same for a lot of people, probably Marvel Knights. The sort of the sort of Kevin Smith Daredevil, and then Morrison X-Men kind of onwards.
Yeah, so I'm actually a second generation comic book fan myself. My father was a fan in the 60s. He got me into comic books around the Batman movie, I believe, was right around that time. The Michael Keaton Batman movie. So yeah, and then I think I got into baseball cards a few years after that, and then eventually came back in mostly around time for Cross Gen to be big, and Image's big move in the mid 90s. So yeah, I guess we have a very similar story.
I was on a panel with Dave Pepos in Chicago a couple of months ago, and I'm asked the question a lot, and I always kind of say, okay, well, I'm second generation, my dad went to like the first comic shop in London to get Giant Size X-Men 1 and all this stuff, and Dave's like looking at me going, I'm third generation. Jesus, man,
what?
Your granddad was reading comics? That's crazy. Yeah.
That's some good nerd genetics right there, third generation.
Yeah, I mean, like there's some argument for Lamarckism there, right?
Yeah. So now you're the writer for Red Goblin. So how do you get involved in the series?
I think I was kind of recommended by Ram V and Al Ewing. Ram, very good friend of mine, Al, very good friend of mine. And they were both jamming on Venom at the time, and another title kind of came up, and they put my name forward. I think Marvel editorial by that point had kind of were happy to sort of trust me with the more sort of horror end of things. So yeah, they kind of came to me and approached me and asked me if I had a take on the book. And that was really the difficult bit. That was the difficult part for me, because I mean I knew about Normie, going way back to like Spectacular 200 or whatever it was. I was kind of present for that, but so the kind of the horror DNA was there, I think, very early on. But figuring out how to kind of sustain that was, for a pitch was kind of tricky. So I kind of went away for a weekend and thought about it, and I thought, okay. So, and sorry, again, long-winded answer, but one of the things Ram always says to me, when I'm kind of, we tell it, we share pitches and everything, and he always says, and I think this is a very good rule of thumb: if the acid test of a good genre pitch is whether you can remove the genre elements and it still works, right? So if you just dig into theme and you go, okay, well, this is actually about blah. And if you can file the serial number off and kind of make it non-genre and it still works, then you've got something that's worth pursuing. And I just thought, okay, so basically it's a traumatized, it's a kid who's just lost his father, and he's getting over it, and he's been given, to get over it, he's basically given an incredibly dangerous dog to look after, and like that was my end. And once I had that, we were kind of off to the races.
So when you thought about it, did the concept immediately hit on you when you were told about? Because the thing with Normie obviously is that he's a kid. Did the idea immediately grab you? Did you think to yourself, how am I going to make this digestible to an audience?
Well, I mean, it was it was weird in a way because, I mean, there was some trepidation initially because um, writing kids is really hard. So, we had to have some sort of conversations in terms of, is because the age question was there was some back and forth about that, and I kind of pushed it as far like I definitely wanted him to be middle school rather than kind of grade school, just because I wanted a voice that I could work
Mm,
with, because I figured, with everything that he'd been through kind of recently with the loss of his father and everything, I felt like I could get away with a slightly more mature voice,
mm,
purely because he's been through a lot, right? Like, this
mm,
is a guy, like, like Dylan, right, has had to grow up super duper fast.
yeah.
So, that was really how I kind of went into that. And in terms of so capturing the voice was a real challenge. But kind of just concept, like, I never I always wanted it to be fun, right? And I thought, okay, well, how do I make it? This is a horror book, ostensibly, but how am I going to make it fun? And there's nothing that isn't fun, I don't think, about this idea of like a young kid who basically has to sort of keep a giant monster on a leash and fails every time, but in spectacular fashion. You know?
Yeah, the one thing I think about when you think about kids is the idea of awareness. You need a
Mm,
character who can be aware of the world around them enough to comment and have an
yeah.
opinion and think about it. So when you're trying to, but the thing is too, if you make him too aware, obviously, then he's an adult. You know what I'm saying? So like, how did you find the happy middle ground to make sure that he's enough of a kid to be a kid, but aware enough to narrate a story?
Well, do you know? Like, I mean, I think, again, sorry, long-winded, but I remember something Richard E. Grant said. That there's a British film called With Nail and I. I don't know whether you've seen it, but it's very funny, and like a lot of British films, it involves drunks. But Richard E. Grant is allergic to alcohol, right? And he famously he plays one of the kind of all-time great drunks of cinema. And someone asked him once, like, how did you play a drunk so well? And he said, well, the key to playing a good drunk is not acting drunk. If you try to act drunk, it's not convincing. The key to performing, to playing a good drunk, is playing someone trying to be sober, right? And I think that, and thank you very much, by the way, for saying, I did try to sort of find a middle ground. But so my approach to Normie was, here's someone who's, been hurt from kind of every angle, can't really, like, his grandfather could at any moment, become like one of the world's most lethal supervillains. Like, he has no solid ground anywhere. So this is a kid who is trying to be an adult at all times.
Mm,
And so I'm not writing him like an adult. I'm writing him, or I'm trying to write him like a kid trying to be an adult.
mm.
And that's kind of the pitch that I went for.
That's cool. So Normie is as you mentioned, the descendant of Norman Osborn, and his symbiote Rascal is kind of a descendant of Carnage. So sort of.
Sort of, yeah. That's not my story to tell, but yeah.
So is this an example of nature versus nurture over here with the story?
That's 100%. Yeah, I mean, that's 100% what I'm kind of leaning into. It's this idea of, because, like, Normie is kind of obsessed with the, like, right off the bat, from issue one. It's, he's convinced that biology is destiny, right?
Hmm.
And that the Osborn, to the point of like magical thinking, right? No self-respecting geneticist would kind of, lean into this, but this idea, the Osborn family name is kind of enough to condemn him, and that he's basically going to end up being a supervillain, right? And
Hmm.
can't really understand why Dylan would give him this kind of unstoppable engine of destruction. Um, so he's kind of obsessed with that question. But then you also have this, the Rascal symbiote, who, Normie names Rascal, and like a lot of people kind of saying, like, why didn't why didn't you give him like a name like, Clorox or something? And I was like, because the whole point is like he's deliberately given the symbiote like a cutesy name, almost like unconsciously to kind of like neutralize the
Mm,
threat. He's like giving it like a sort of like a Chihuahua name,
yeah.
to kind of diminish it in his own head, even though like he knows this thing's like all knives.
Mm,
Um, but like the whole point is like Rascal, unlike a lot of other because he's a Life Foundation symbiote, right? So he's kind of a hodgepodge of a load of others.
mm,
He's never experienced the hive. Um, he doesn't know what a null is, right? So he's basically a blank slate. He's a baby, and um, I mean, I try not to let my own convictions kind of seep into my work, but I'm not a huge believer in original sin, either kind of biologically or kind of religiously. Um, you know, he's Rascal is an innocent. And so, I wanted to kind of, like the very first issue, I kind of went back to that kind of that Venom thing that hasn't been kind of dealt with, I think, in quite a while, where, like he really likes chocolate because it kind of
mm,
replicates the hormones that he can get from kind of eating brains. So
mm.
I just had like, okay, so Rascal like really likes chocolate and will like when Normie's kind of asleep, he'll kind of take his body out and kind of, he'll rob a bodega and just like, eat a load of Hershey bars or something. Um, so I think like the idea is that they're both naive, they're both kind of intensely vulnerable, and they're both obviously together. They represent an enormous threat,
Mm,
but they're both just kind of they're both like two sort of wide-eyed innocents trying to make their way through the world, trying to do the right thing, but they both have these incredibly violent instincts that they're both kind of trying to suppress, which to my mind is kind of that's dramatic gold, right?
mm,
It's if you're don't get me wrong, love Steve Rogers, absolutely love Steve Rogers, but he walks a straight line, right? And I think that there's something inherently compelling about two individuals who you would pick out of a crowd, and go, okay, well, like they're going to be bad apples, and they're just trying, man. They're just trying, like the rest of us, right? They're
mm.
just trying to do the right thing. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, but this sort of the acid test, isn't it? Is when whether you kind of get back on the horse and try again. You know what I mean?
Mm. Well, historically speaking, 'cause once again, Normie comes from a line of characters with a very deep backstories, and as we know, Harry and Normie were both kind of corrupted by the Green Goblin persona.
Mm.
Does Normie worry about being corrupted by Rascal's persona?
Um, I play with that a lot. I mean, where I'm up to, I think issue 5 just dropped. So yeah, like issue 4's, issue 4, we have this almost a kind of almost like a sort of bottle episode between
Yeah.
like Norman Osborn and Normie, where Norman's basically figured out that his grandson has this symbiote and tries to kind of remove him. But the big kind of revelation that Normie has, which I don't think is like a contribution to sort of symbiote lore so much as I'm trying to kind of lean into something that already exists, but just this idea that they're they're almost kind of mirrors, right? So when Eddie Brock first gets the Venom symbiote, you see, like he smothers a prison guard to death, right? And now, by any index, Venom is, I think, pretty definitively like a hero of the Marvel universe, right? So like that's a symbiote that has had the sort of cheap calories, like the empty calories of like eating brains, and now wants to do the right thing. And so I think in terms of a sort of moral journey, what I wanted for Normie was for him to realize, oh, this thing is basically amplifying all of my emotional states.
Mm,
So anything that this thing does that's wrong is basically a kind of hyper kind of inflation and exaggeration of my own emotional state.
mm,
So it actually kind of it's on me to be the kind of the responsible one here, right? Like in the same way that if you have a vicious dog on a if you have a vicious dog and you don't keep it on a leash and it attacks someone, that's on you, right? You are legally culpable. And so Normie's conclusion is, okay, well, like, if Rascal does something bad, like, ultimately he's only doing that because he's a mood ring, right? Like, that is what symbiotes are. They have minds of their own, but they're basically mood rings, right? They are feeding off brain chemistry and kind of, dialing it up because they want to give you that kind of chemical reward to give you
Mm.
more and more of what you want. So so Normie's whole thing, like, basically, he just has to be really kind of buttoned down at all times. And of course, when he fails to do so, that's that's inherently kind of dramatically interesting. But that's also the kind of the struggle, and I hope that's why kind of people empathize with him, because
Mm.
he's got the Hulk problem, right? He's got the Banner problem. Like, sorry, the Banner problem, in the sense that, like, I am, like, Bruce Banner is like, his perennial responsibility is like, he is a jailer for this other guy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And, like, I think that, like, that's like Normie's got a similar relationship. Like, he's the jailer. Sorry.
No, it makes good sense. And the thing too with when you write for Marvel, you have not only do you have to write but think about your own series, but now you have the large universe. So do you have to figure out where Normie fits into the larger Marvel universe and what his role is within this world of superheroes?
I mean, to an extent, although, I mean, we were very fortunate in the sense that we were kind of given our own little corner, because we've got sort of one foot in the Spider-Man office and one foot, sorry, pardon me, we've got one foot in the Spider-Man office and one foot in the symbiote office. So we had a little bit more latitude there anyway, because it's not quite a spider book and it's not quite a symbiote book. It's sort of something in between. But there was certainly, I mean, editorial tends to kind of take care of a lot of that stuff. You
Mm.
kind of, I would approach, Devin Lewis or Lindsay Cohick or Tom Groneman, and I would say, look, can I use this? But the only time that kind of got sort of interesting was, but there was a character that I wanted to reintroduce, because I kind of figured that they'd be around the same age. Um, and Yeah, it was basically, there's an issue of Iron Man that I always loved as a kid, and I could, I'm not the guy who can kind of give you the exact issue, but, like, I've got it in front of me. It's Iron Man 182, and it was one of, part of Denny O'Neil's run, and it was, the sort of the sequel to, like, Demon in a Bottle, where, Tony's kind of, on the streets of Manhattan in January, and, his friend Gretel is about to give birth. It's like, she's an alcoholic too, and Tony's, he's hit rock bottom, and she gives birth and kind of passes away in this doorway, and there's this baby that Tony's kind of left with. And, like, you see the baby, I think, once more, I think, in, like, Iron Man 200, where, he's like, the kid's in an orphanage, still a baby, and that was kind of it. But, like, that baby saved Tony Stark's life. And that issue, I mean, I must have read that thing when I was very young, but it was, part of my dad's collection. But it always kind of affected me very deeply. And, I reread it a bunch of times just to kind of get the details right. And it's Denny O'Neil, and I think Denny O'Neil's a very kind of timeless writer. I think, like, his narrative voice is very contemporary. There are some writers you just can't date particularly well, or sorry, that they're kind of perennially relevant. Like
Yeah.
Steve Gerber. You read Gerber stuff in the late '70s, it reads like it was written 5 minutes ago. It's like that kind of thing. But, like, I love that character. And I also, man, like, so, like, Tony Stark's just got this, like, kid that he saved that kind of saved him from alcoholism. And, like, you never kind of caught up with him. So one of the first things I did was I spoke to Devin, the editor, and I said, can I just have this kid be, like, a classmate of Normie's, and they're kind of pals? And they went away, and I think sort of had a word with Tom Brevoort about it. And I got the green light. And yeah, I got to kind of I got to bring this kid back after kind of 35 years and kind of age him up to kind of Normie's age. And, like, yeah, they're kind of pals now. So, like, and I know that sounds really weird, but in a lot of respects, like, that's the thing I'm kind of proudest of is, I've kind of, you know, I haven't, I don't think I've sort of thrown any kind of, like garbage cans in front of Jerry that like he has to kind of deal with this in Iron Man at all. Like it's, I've made it very kind of, it's okay. So he's been in an orphanage and everything, and like Tony's kind of checked up on him every now and then, but they, they don't have like a relationship, but he's basically kind of paid for him to go to this kind of like Manhattan school and everything. So, but it's just kind of like that kind of stuff. I love doing creator owned books, but this world is kind of, I grew up on it, and to just be able to kind of just redress what I always thought was a kind of like mild historical injustice. Yeah, like that feels really good, you know. I like it, yeah, okay. I mean, I'd love to do kind of, like I don't know, like a Kree Skrull war or something. Yeah, I'd love to do something huge, but like doing little things like that. I mean, sorry, I know this is far more long-winded than you wanted, but a lot of the one-shots that I was given when I first started doing work for Marvel, I ended up doing these weird like, and I always found it hugely fun, just doing kind of like cut scenes from like the Celestial Messiah saga. And I did like an Avengers one-shot where like I got to do like a scene with the Illuminati before the first issue of the Illuminati and everything. Like I love doing stuff like that. Just kind of just. I mean, I don't know. Maybe the people who wrote these things originally think it's kind of parasitic, but I just kind of love doing the kind of like, here's the DVD extra. I love that stuff. I love it.
So, can we look forward to more Easter eggs coming in Red Goblin?
Uh, yeah, I would say so. There's certainly a few more. Some old friends. I mean, I'm not dropping. I don't think I'm dropping dime. Um, uh, when oh maybe I am. Crossbone's going to turn up, so that's fun. And that's on a cover, so whatever. Um, but I mean, weirdly, it's been very nice to kind of keep it very sort of tightly focused. I mean, I did like a Carnage crossover recently, and I involved Normie in that. But mostly, like, I just get to kind of do a very kind of tightly focused sort of I hope like a very New York book as well. Like I just spent a couple of months. A friend of mine let me their apartment in NYC, and so I was just going around and trying to kind of make sure that all the locations in the book were kind of accurate and everything. Just getting really kind of anal about it, and just kind of. So Jan Bazaldua, the artist, I was just sending her kind of photographic reference that I'd taken that day from kind of the Museum of Natural History, or like the one of the few buildings on the Upper West Side that like actually has like a dragon gargoyle and stuff. And I was just being really like, no, it's okay. So this is like within a couple of blocks, and just I don't know. It's better than a real job.
Yes, I 100% agree with you. So between Dylan, Normie, and the child from you just mentioned from Iron Man, are there any well-adjusted children in the Marvel universe?
Um, what an interesting and I think probably self-explanatory question. Um, I mean, no, yeah, I guess not. I mean, yeah, no, the Richards kids, no, not not at all. But again, I mean, that's the thing, though, isn't it? I think there's no drama if they are, right? I mean, that's it's kind of funny. Like it's I remember when I was doing I did a like a Darkhold Spider-Man thing, which has weirdly kind of gone on to achieve this sort of weird, quite small kind of cult status. But like a lot of people, because it was so messed up, I kind of did this. The idea was it was kind of like Peter Parker's worst nightmare. So I just sort of did this, sort of, Steve Orlando kind of very kindly kind of gave me like a Spider-Man issue to just kind of go, okay, imagine the kind of the Spider-Man, do Spider-Man but horror. So I did this thing where it was kind of basically he has to like web Manhattan back together every single day, like Sisyphus, right? And in the end, like it's horrendous anyway. But I remember kind of a couple people I know were kind of going, oh, like can you not make it kind of too rough? Because like, you know, Peter's been kind of going through a bit of a rough time. I just went, that's not my job. You know, like Stephen King said, you know, was it in On Writing, which I would recommend.
Mm.
He said, you know, the writer's job, right, is to make you care about a character, which thankfully, and this is the great thing about the Marvel, that's done for you, right? You care about them already. The care is already baked in. But you know, you create a character, you make people care about them, and then you stick them up a tree and throw rocks at them. That's storytelling.
That's true. So in issue 5, you propelled the reader into the Carnage Reigns crossover.
Mhm.
That recently came out. Is it difficult to take the baton from writers and stories in the middle of a crossover event?
Well, not so much because I was taking the baton from myself. So because I was pinch hitting on Carnage for 4 issues, so I got to write the Carnage issues. I got to write the Alpha issue. I got to write 2 Carnage issues, and I got to write the Red Goblin issue. And then I kind of handed over to the great Cody Ziegler, who did all the kind of the Spider-Man Miles Morales issues, and then the Omega issue. So yeah, I mean, I was very lucky in the sense that I kind of got to sort of make my own. I got to make my own on ramp, basically.
Is it difficult to write an issue that is one the continuation of a series, but also continuation of other titles crossover? For especially considering every reader had not necessarily read the other titles.
That was exactly what I was going to say. Yeah, I mean, that was it. And I did have to. I wrote I wrote Red Goblin 5 because you know I'm still kind of new to kind of big two work, right? Relatively new. I've been doing it for a couple of years, but uh, there was so much in the because the narration's pretty complicated, right?
Mm,
So the narration in Red Goblin is it's as much him talking to his own symbiote as it is him talking to the reader, right?
mm.
So it's a first person, but every now and then he'll kind of break and go like, you know, I don't know, like put put the security guard down, you know, it'll be something like that. And that feels intuitive to me because you know I've been with the character for 4 issues, but you know we had a discussion with the editors, and they were kind of well ultimately, you know, there's a bunch of Carnage readers who don't know who the heck this is, so the safest thing would be for you to yank that out, and I did that, and I think it worked. So, but it has this weird effect where you're almost because you're doing that thing of treating it's the Jim Shooter thing of treating every issue as though it's
Mm.
someone's first, right? But with crossovers, I think that becomes less less a guiding principle and more a kind of ironclad like edict, right? So you almost have him you have to kind of reintroduce the character in their own
Mm.
book. It's quite odd, but you know, like I haven't had any death threats, so
So far so good, huh?
I guess it went well. Uh,
So I mean, as people know, Carnage is Cletus Kasady, basically. What?
Not so much at the moment, but yeah,
Well, yeah. Well, the primary villain was Cletus Kasady in the current crossover, is my understanding, sort of.
yeah. It's the Carnage. The Carnage symbiote is and this will lead into things that I think Ram is kind of is going to conclude his run in a one shot, and then Cullen Bunn's doing a big kind of a big crossover, I think, because this is the summer of symbiotes, right? So it's a big thing, and I think the Carnage symbiote is off in space, basically attaining kind of godlike powers comparable to Null, after he kind of got divorced from kind of Cletus Kasady, as it were. Um, but Cletus still has a symbiote, which is kind of a hybrid of a symbiote dragon that he stole, that the Iron Man kind of tamed with the extremis, with the kind of the extremis virus, and an Iron Man suit. So Cletus kind of has an Iron Man suit and a symbiote dragon to play with. And yeah, that's a pretty kind of dangerous combination.
So what's the more interesting villain then, Cletus Kasady or Carnage?
I think it depends who you ask. Because again, I mean, and others may disagree. I view symbiotes very much as mood rings. So, Carnage basically bonded to Cletus from the moment it was born, and it basically is him, I think, in every way that counts. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's full of action and everything, but there's a sequence in one of the issues of Carnage that I wrote where he's sort of having his kind of moment of triumph. He's basically kind of taken over Stark Industries sort of skyscraper, and he's kind of infiltrated it with sort of symbiote goo. And the first thing he does is, out of his own sort of mass, he makes a Cletus Kasady for him to talk to. Because that's basically the relationship that he's kind of had with Carnage, right? It's, to my mind, it's kind of that sort of the serial killer's kind of pathological narcissism, right? Like his ideal companion and the ideal audience for his crimes is himself. And that's kind of the relationship they've always had. It's like, isn't this cool? Yeah, and it's basically just him the whole time going, yeah, that's really cool. You should go even further. Why don't you eat a whole diner? So that's kind of that was my kind of insight. So I mean, and again, your mileage may vary, others' mileage may vary. I think they're the same. They're the same cat.
So, I mean, Carnage has now been around or Cletus Kasady been around now for 30 about 30 something years approximately.
Yeah.
Again, Amazing Spider-Man was a 361 is pretty much when Ray got the ball rolling, not counting the Venom cameos in 344.
My school biology textbook, I remember I had a fold out poster from, I think it was Wizard, like a Carnage one. And my school biology, like my high school biology textbook, was wrapped in a Carnage poster. And in answer to your other question, yes, I was bullied.
yes.
Relentlessly.
When we were kids, being a nerd wasn't as cool as it is now, unfortunately.
It's so good, right? It's like they get to go into school and talk about Iron Man, and people go, "Oh yeah, cool," rather than who.
I'm telling you, that's why they don't appreciate the movies that come out. They're like, "Oh, this is crap." I'm like, "You don't understand anything." When I was the kid, we would have died for a movie like that to be, cool when we were a kid. You don't get it. But yeah, well, for a little while, in the 90s, early 2000s, I used to buy every appearance of Carnage. So if you showed up like in the page of I remember there's a Carnage appearance, something with Beavis and Butthead. I bought the damn issue because Carnage shows up in a page.
Wow.
I was such a big fan of him at the time, and some random appearance he had too that I bought because it was Carnage. But the thing with what makes Cletus Kasady, do you think, such a great villain that's been around for, because Venom obviously is a great villain character as well. I liked him better as a villain, but a great character. But Cletus has not come off from just being kind of like a ripoff of Venom to being a truly great villain on his own. So why do you think he worked so well? And why do you think he's endured?
Do you know, I was doing. I've got a. I hope you don't mind me kind of cross plugging, but I got a creator owned book out at the moment called All Against All. The trade just dropped today. Through Image. Very proud of it. And I co-created it with Caspar Wingard. And when issue 1 came out, we went down to London to do some signings at Forbidden Planet. And I was just getting motoring on Carnage at the time. And Caspar showed me like an Instagram video of his kids using like an Instagram face app to be Carnage, right? And they were kind of, they were holding it up and kind of doing the growl thing and everything. And my kid, right? Like my kid has a Carnage Lego minifigure and is like obsessed with it, loves it. And, does the voice and kind of sits there growling away, going, Carnage, And I kind of asked, I said, what is it? Like, why do, obviously, we like the character, but like, why do kids really love Carnage? What is that? And obviously, you can't show them half the kind of Carnage comics, but what is it about Carnage that kids love? And Casper, I think he nailed it, man. He said, "Oh, it's Spider-Man, but a dinosaur."
What?
Oh, that's it. He's a dinosaur.
I never thought
And
about that.
but like way more than, because the thing is, and I don't get me wrong, I think it's a strength, but Venom has that kind of Wolverine thing, I think,
Mm.
of being, incredibly violent, but basically samurai.
Mm.
Like Venom has a code. And Carnage kind of doesn't. Carnage is, the absolute encyclopedic definition of no power, ultimate
Yeah.
power and no responsibility. It's, what would you do if you had these powers? I would eat everyone. Like, you know what I mean? It's,
he,
yeah, just
he is great. I mean, he's visually awesome as well, character,
yeah,
especially
yeah.
the Bagley images from the original how conceived. It's such a great character. And also the thing
Well,
with
but I
Karn.
think that's the thing. But like he's the fact that like he just never, it's funny. Like I was talking to Dan Waters a while ago about what it is, what why we're both huge horror nerds. I think one of Dan's favorite films is The Thing. My favorite film is The Fly, like the Cronenberg remake. And we were kind of talking very kind of structurally about what it is about horror. Why what works in horror. And Dan nailed it, right? He said what works in The Thing, what works in The Fly, what works in The Blob, what works in all these classic kind of horror movies is that the Alien as well, right? So think about Alien. So in Act One, they go to a planet. There's an egg. There's the face hugger. Okay, that's the threat. We've nailed the threat. We know what that is. Okay, let's deal with that. Face hugger falls off. What's the threat? They're going to have lunch. Chest burster. Ah, okay, right. That's the threat. That's the threat. It's not the threat. In The Fly, every time you look at Goldblum, it's different, right?
Mm.
Something's changed. Every time you look at The Thing, it's not. It's Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. You only ever know what it was, not what it is.
Mm.
So the nature of the threat constantly changes, which is terrifying because we're human beings. We need to categorize things. We need to know where things are. We need to know that things have a definite shape.
Mm.
And so things that don't have a definite shape, things that can just change on you, are inherently terrifying, right? And Carnage, I think, is like the embodiment of that. Carnage is just this like, I think like Ram described it as like a tornado of meat lava. Like, you know what I mean? Like he just doesn't, he's not static. He's just fluid and
Yeah.
constantly changing. Like it's inspired. Like it really is.
And the thing with Carnage too, I find is, and I wonder from a point of view of a writer, he's such a big personality.
Mm.
He could anytime he's in an issue, he kind of takes the oxygen out of against and from everyone else, and he kind of focuses on himself because he's the biggest thing in almost any title. He's the big threat anytime he's around.
Mm.
So on the one hand, when with something like Red Goblin, he's connected directly in a way to the character, as we said through Rascal. But at the same time, is there a so I mean you kind of want him in the rogues gallery, but at the same time, every time he's around, you kind of have to make it an event comic because he's such a major threat and a major personality. So
Mm.
is he someone that we're going to see a lot in Red Goblin? Is he too much of a personality that you have to be careful how often you put him in?
Um, I can't say too much, I'm afraid. I mean, I don't want to kind of. I've certainly, I've certainly had the contact that I want Normie to have with Cletus for now. Um, whether that I can't speak to kind of whether that's going to have a kind of sequel, as it were. But certainly, I mean, if you read the latest issue of Red Goblin, the contact that they do have is potent and meaningful,
Mm.
because the Rascal symbiote has been kind of off, kind of doing its own thing, but now it's kind of come into contact with Kasady, and it's almost. I'm trying to think of a sort of of a sort of suitable analogy, but like it's the kind of, it's the sort of domestic husky has kind of finally met the kind of, dire wolf and gone, oh, I might be that, which is obviously a very kind of dangerous place for Rascal to be in. So that's kind of that was what I wanted to kind of taint Rascal a little bit through his kind of exposure to kind of Cletus Kasady. So I would say his influence is going to be felt, but maybe not as directly.
I mean, like I said, because you got so many interesting characters going on with Normie, Rascal, Cletus. I mean, the symbiote. There's so many great characters that you're working around that is actually, it's just a fascinating title that you have right now with Red Goblin, and and the potential, what you can do with it. Oh,
Oh no,
appreciate
I
that.
really appreciate it, Jeff. Thank you. I mean, I'm really trying to do something that is both. I guess I like something that's very kind of Marvel with all the kind of angst that you want from kind of a Marvel book.
Mm.
But I think so. Like I mean, I said this elsewhere, so apologies. But like I remember sort of saying, like I really I want to do something. If I mean, God, when it, at the end of a couple of arcs, I want to do something that is both, very, very kind of Marvel, but also very kind of emotionally kind of grounded. Like,
Mm.
like I want, I always kind of take these things as a bit of. I remember like I did like a swordsman one shot a few years ago, which is a tie into Al Ewing's Empire, and I remember that that there were a couple. Don't get me wrong. I don't take these things personally at all. It didn't bother me, but someone was kind of saying, "Oh, a swordsman one shot, whatever." And I remember just thinking in that moment, like that was great for me. That was all I needed. I was like, okay, I'm going to make you cry. Um, and I don't know whether I did for that particular individual, but a couple of people kind of got back to me afterwards and said, "Oh, like you did something that was kind of that
Mm.
that really kind of really kind of choked me up." Um, so that's kind of what I want to do here. Yes, it's a kid with a dangerous dog, but I also want it to be Lassie.
Yeah. And I mean, and you're working on another title that I think is fascinating. You're doing Night Terrors the Flash.
Mm.
So how closely tied to this issue is it with what Cy Spirit is going to be doing with the upcoming Flash series?
Um, I mean, full disclosure, I don't know what Cy's doing. I showed him the first issue the other day. I thought because he's a good friend of mine, um, and I thought it would be a good idea to do so. And I think we're sort of thinking, he seemed to think that we were sort of our thinking was kind of broadly kind of in alignment. I know that what I'm doing isn't going to directly inform. I mean, if nothing else, because I'm doing a Barry Allen story and he's doing a Wally West story, right?
Mm.
So, but I know that what I know that what I'm doing um, is like I'm viewing it more as a kind of, and I don't mean I hand to God, like I don't mean this to be like a capstone on anybody else's take, but if what I'm doing sort of acts as a kind of palate cleanser for what Cy is doing, because I think we have broadly sort of similar sensibilities, then I consider that to be a sort of signal honor. Really, I love Cy's stuff, and um, uh, so I think it'll be alluded to, but I don't think it'll necessarily kind of dominate, if you know what I mean.
Mm. And the thing with obviously Night Terrors sounds like a horror comic book. So, but it's DC. So how deep into the horror genre can you lean into with this book, or how deep or how much are you going to lead into it
Well,
with the
I
series?
mean, it was interesting because I mean, I wrote a version of it that was a lot harder than uh, than 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 it a lot harder than what we kind of ended up. And ultimately kind of I agreed with the editor, right? Because I mean, I do, I think at core, I think I'm a horror guy. So it's always my kind of instinct to have as many kind of exploding heads as possible. But these are not my characters, and they're not, and I got to do a bunch of that in kind of DC versus Vampires, the series I did with Matt Rosenberg. So I got to kind of scratch that itch. So I had to sort of stay the right side of respectful, but that's good because I think it's some structure is only inhibiting, I think, if you have a sort of paucity of imagination. You know what I mean? So if you work within certain constraints, then you can go, okay, well, in that case, I have to lean more into, I don't have that kind of, I got away with some gore, don't get me wrong. But I can't lean into it as heavily as I would elsewhere. So instead, I'm going to have to rely on pacing, atmosphere, chills. So, I would say, without giving too much away, I view it as kind of Lynchian. So, I've done a Flash story that I think is, if you're a fan of kind of Lost Highway or Mulholland Drive, I think you're going to like this. So it doesn't. It's going to leave you. I think hopefully, if I've done my job, it's going to leave you with a horrible taste in your mouth. But yeah, not because you've seen someone melt like a candle.
Well, I definitely look forward to seeing it. Mr. Paknadel, is absolutely honest with you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for finding the time. Really appreciate it. It would be my privilege. Thank you so much.